Okay, we now move to question 2. How do you account for the close association on the right between political and religious conservatism, and on the left between political and religious liberalism or secularism, or do you disagree that such an association exists?
I do think that historically it is true that this association between political and religious conservatism on the one hand and liberalism on the other did not obtain exactly as Susan says. The reason that it obtains now is because religious conservatives are in fact not the biblical literalists that Susan fears that they are. The truth of the matter is that if you are a biblical literalist and you read the Bible exactly for what it says, you are more likely to be a social conservative on social issues and an economic liberal. The Bible fulminates against the rich, and so if you take it literally, that's how you're going to come out. The truth of the matter is religious conservatives do not take the Bible literally across the board. They take the Bible literally in some respects, and yet they read the economic passages in the Bible contextually. They say, listen, at a time when land, for example, was the form of wealth, property was a zero-sum game. If you had more, somebody else had less. The concept of economic growth didn't exist in ancient society. Countries would go hundreds of years without any fundamental change in their economic circumstances. But in societies that have property, contracts, mobility, where wealth is not in land but in money, those rules don't have to apply because the underlying premise is different. So in other words, we are dealing here with sincere people on both sides of the spectrum attempting to use, you may say, philosophical and theological analysis to make sense of what the Bible means. So my objection to Susan is not that the religious conservatives are right or the liberals are right, but she seems to think that there's a certain category of discourse that enjoys an elevated status. If you give religious justifications, as she puts it, you're somehow out of bounds. Well, what I ask you is, are the secular justifications themselves defensible on the basis of reason? When Obama says the rich are not paying their fair share, he never says what the fair share actually is. Should the rich pay 90%? Should they pay 70%? Should they pay 50%? What does he think is fair? When half of Americans pay no taxes at all, income taxes, that seems okay with him. And so no justification is ever given to explain what the fair share, what do you mean by the word fair? And is there any reasonable way to settle the issue? No. So if somebody else comes and says, I think that based upon my religious convictions, everybody should have just the same, or I think based on my religious convictions that everybody should pay proportional taxation, are their justifications somehow any less, any more inappropriate in a democratic society, so they should be moved out of respectable discourse? They should not be listened to because after all they're quoting scripture instead of what, Paul Krugman or Maureen Dowd in the New York Times?